everybody. Welcome to Back Talk. Today we're going to talk a little bit about spiritual gifts, and specifically fivefold ministry. You have any idea what that is? Well, that's kind of a new term to me as well. But Marta and Rolene are going to talk a little bit about it. And I would like you to think about what your spiritual gifts are. We all have them. From the moment we become believers and a part of the family of God, we have been given spiritual gifts. And even if you think that yours is not very significant, I promise you it is. So let's talk a little bit about fivefold ministry. And as some of you already know, I'm here with Rolene Fagoni and Marta Escarcica, and my name is Liz Stokel. So Marta, fivefold ministry.
Fivefold ministry is basically out of leadership gifts, and it's out of Ephesians 4:12. And there's the gifts of Corinthians, and then there's the gifts that are talked about in Romans, and then there's the leadership gifts, the fivefold, which are apostle, prophet, evangelist, teacher, pastor. And often, if you look at American Christianity, we always talk about our pastor, our pastor, our pastor, our pastor. And then the teacher. A lot of pastors are teachers. And there's the other gifts, and there's other scripture that talks about the church being founded upon the apostle and prophet. And there's some beliefs that those gifts have been done away with. The apostle and prophet no longer exist. But the way I look at scripture, I think they still do exist. And so we don't see a lot of that in the church. We don't hear a lot about it in the church. And it's just starting to be emerging now. And there's certain characteristics of each of those gifts. You know, it's kind of funny because a lot of times people say, my pastor this, my pastor said that. And a lot of times those pastors are really teachers.
So I just have a question about the leadership. So leadership, my understanding is that leadership is a gift of leadership. Mm-hmm. So are these then fall under the leadership umbrella? If you do not have the gift of leadership, you don't have these other gifts? Or are these in addition to or separately from the gift of leadership?
I've heard of the gift of leadership or the gift of administration, mm-hmm. which comes out of the Romans 12 gifts. And so leadership administration, which is different. Those are called also motivational gifts, and that's different than the other leadership gifts of Ephesians, which are the equipping and training of saints. You don't see that terminology in Romans. Okay.
But leader for me is another word for servant. If you're a leader, you're serving. Right. And I should be.
Yeah. Right. And I think that we lose sight of that in the church with our leaders. You know, there's a lot of pride that goes into being a leader, and as that pride builds and develops and people start following you, it's very seductive.
The Corinthians gifts, the gifts of the Spirit, the gifts of Jesus, and the gifts of the Father. The prophet is the only one that's in all three listed. Mm-hmm. So as I've studied it, they function differently. They look a little differently in each one.
The prophet under those three umbrellas are a little bit different. Okay?
Yes. The gifts of prophecy in Corinthians is also different, where a person may not be a prophet, but they may get a word of knowledge about somebody and function in that way.
I've always heard it described as the ability to see truth where others cannot see it.
Right.
And so it's not a negative thing. It's
right.
Just, you know, you just see that it's a truth, and you can butt heads a lot when
right.
with that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. And then there's a person like out of Romans that talks about the prophet, and that often refers to a person maybe like I think of Wilberforce, you know, the movie Amazing Grace. Mm. He had a voice for the nation, right? I think of Martin Luther King. He, in a sense, he was a prophet. He saw something, and he had a voice, and he stood for righteousness. And so he sometimes was referred to as that.
Wow. And so apostle, prophet, evangelist, which is evangelist, somebody who proclaims the gospel.
Absolutely, proclaims the gospel. I think of people like Billy Graham. He's an evangelist. He's a leader. I mean, we're all called to proclaim the gospel, right. But maybe some people just have a burning heart's desire. They're going to go out and see souls every day. I mean, they're just out there. So they definitely have this gift of evangelism on them. And then there's pastor, which we often see, and teacher.
And teacher, which can be, as you pointed out, different than pastor. So my question is, if you're a prophet and you see truth where other people can't, or you see into the future, not in a crystal ball kind of way,
right,
but you kind of see the direction something is going and you sort of understand. So words of knowledge. It is my understanding and my belief that gossip can get tied up in this a little bit. And so people have a word of knowledge and then they decide to interpret it, and now they're kind of bordering on gossip because it is against God's nature to gossip, right? The New Testament talks about the tongue,
right,
more than any other part of the body, and the dangers of the tongue. And of course Paul flat out calls out a couple of women who he says are gossiping and causing problems in the church. He flat out calls those women out.
I don't need to concern myself.
Because you are the perfect church lady. You would never gossip. Now about the pride.
I read about gossip.
I heard about it. Oh wait, in the Bible, that's right. My question is about the word of knowledge and then interpretation.
Well, if you look at the Corinthians, the gifts in Corinthians, and word of knowledge is one. Let's say someone has a word of knowledge, and let's say I hear something about for Elaine. Okay, I hear the word blood pressure. Okay, and the Lord, I just say something like, I'm hearing something blood pressure. Does that mean anything to you? Now, the interpretation would be, this is the part we add on. God never said high blood pressure or low blood pressure. He just said blood pressure.
And he never said it was her or her husband or a family member.
Right, exactly. So I say that to her, and I've heard this instance, so it's like maybe I have the assumption, high blood pressure. So I start praying, she has high blood pressure. And that was off, because my interpretation was added to that. And God doesn't. We're not supposed to add our interpretation to it. We're just supposed to hear it and then give it. And so that's where the mistakes are made. And that's a learning process. And if you hear something, and so let's say I'm praying for Elaine, and I'm just kind of hearing the word blood pressure, and what does that mean to you? Oh, my mother has blood pressure. Can we? Oh, okay. Then we can pray for her.
I do have an uncle that is a prophet. And he had told his granddaughter that was pregnant, he said, now, just remember, in the end, everything will be okay with that baby. And she goes, but Grandpa, I'm not worried or concerned. And he goes, okay, but just remember. And there were complications, and she went back to the word that her grandfather gave her, knowing that the word of the Lord had come through her grandfather, saying everything would be okay. So she was able to establish herself in that very same peace.
Right.
Knowing that the outcome was ensured. Sometimes it's just one word.
Right.
And it's very frustrating.
Right. And it's supposed to be the prophetic, those gifts, words of knowledge, are supposed to be for encouragement. Okay, it's always supposed to be for encouragement, and that's the learning process. As maybe you're walking in that, and you learn that, and God may tell you something maybe scary about something else, but you don't come out and say this negative thing. This is where you're learning of how to give a word. Of course, in all of it, love is above it all.
Right.
The Scripture talks about, you may prophesy, you may sell everything, to be given away, but if you don't have love, it doesn't profit. So a word of knowledge for somebody not given in love, it profits them nothing. Right. So really, love is foundational.
Yeah, I have a family member who prophesied over me a year or so ago and told me that they had seen a vision of Jonah, and told me that I was in the belly of the whale. And so this person went from the prophecy to what the meaning was. And you are in the belly of the whale. And it was just very frightening. It was also made me very angry and frustrated, because I thought, okay, I know that I'm not running from God. I know that I'm not running from God. And I know that I'm not in the belly of the whale. And so I responded in that way, no, I'm not running from God. Yes, you are, and it was just so...
And how do you argue with God?
And how do I argue with God? time you argue with God. So I just pray, God, whatever Jonah has to teach me, I want to chew up the meat and spit out the bones.
Right.
And please help me to see this. And I had to remind myself about the encouragement. Interestingly, about 6 months later, I took a Bible study, and I went to this Bible study, didn't have a clue what it was about. Turns out it was about Jonah. And, had I allowed myself to fall into that place of fear, I would have run screaming from that Bible study, because the prophecy had been not very positive. And so I could have run screaming from that. Instead, I just thought, I'm here to Bible study about Jonah. I wonder what the meat is going to be, because I've already decided I'm spitting out the bones.
So did the Lord unfold?
It unfolded unpacked so much in that book of Jonah. And you know what? It was all completely positive. And this is what I would really love for you to know that God showed me through the study of Jonah, is that my son had spent some time in prison. And God revealed to me through that study that, when Jonah ran from God, he was thrown overboard because there was a storm brewing. And the unbelievers in the boat, we assume that they're unbelievers, and we're not told that they're believers. The unbelievers threw him overboard and said, surely somebody is ticked off God. Has ticked off God, even though they don't really know.
I still have that theology today in the church.
Surely somebody has ticked off God. Let's throw him out.
Who can I throw out?
I know. Who can I throw out? That's not a good way to look at it. I know. That's a whole other topic. We'll go there too. And so he was thrown overboard, and he was in the belly of the whale. And so God showed me that Jonah was protected from the storm that was raging overhead. While he was in that whale,
and
he was protected from the storms that rage inside the church sometimes when all the people want to pick it
God
up.
was still ensuring that Jonah got to the destination that God had planned.
Well, not only that, but he was spit up right back in the same place he started. And gave him another chance to now do what God told him to do. And he said to him, and so through that study, I learned that God is a God of second chances, that he will give you another opportunity. If you blow one opportunity, he will give you another one if you're willing, and again and again and again. And that he protected my son. While he was in prison, it may have seemed like the belly of the whale, but he was being protected from storms that I was unaware of, and that even my own son will never be aware of. And I would love for that message to go into any moms or dads whose children are in prison, or in rehab, or in some sort of a dark place that may seem, or they don't know where they are. I want you to know that God, a place that might seem like the belly of the whale, is a place where God is protecting them from a storm that may destroy them. And it's not God's desire that they are destroyed. It is God's desire that they are protected.
Amen.
Hey, great conversation, great topic. Another exciting day here at Back Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. Next time.